Hi Chris, this is my submission for the resource critique assignment. I've chosen to look at Joseph Boyden's novella Wenjack. The novella is a literary form that is longer than a short story, but is much shorter than a traditional novel. It is the style that I think is highly accessible for most high school learners. Boyden uses the novella form to tell the story of Cheney Wenjack, a story that has become well known across Canada. Boyden released Wenjack alongside Gord Downie's Secret Path, doubly amplifying Cheney's story across the nation. This resource could be used in English, history, or Indigenous studies classes. While form, language, and illustrations make this text accessible to multiple grade levels and learning levels, I think that this resource can be used during or after grade 10 students have taken Canadian history. Having the context of the atrocities of residential schools makes Cheney's story pack an even more powerful punch. Before implementing a more critical critique, I would like to emphasize two things that Boyden does right. First, he does a great job of telling Cheney's story, one that would usually be hidden away from the public knowledge or ignored by the public. Boyden leaves no room for Cheney's story to be ignored or forgotten, honoring Cheney's experience through storytelling. Second, Boyden emphasizes that Cheney's story is one of many. He does so in his author's note when he states on page 100, Cheney wasn't, by a very long shot, the only child to leave for a residential school and never return. Many thousands of children died during their time in these alien institutions, from disease, from abuse, from exposure, or accidents while trying to run away. The true number of children who died under the watch of those responsible for their care will never be known. Proper records were purposely not kept. The death of these countless innocents remains one of the deepest, most brutal stains on Canada's history. For this resource, the issue does not lie with the content, but instead with the author. About a year ago, APTN released an investigative piece on Joseph Boyden that questioned his claims of Indigenous heritage. They did so very successfully, so much so that Boyden has been unable to refute the claims in a legitimate way thus far. The issue of misclaiming Indigenous heritage brings up a number of issues and critical questions, including who can tell the stories of Indigenous Canadians or any other marginalized community for that matter? How does Boyden's misclaiming damage the chances of other Indigenous writers gaining a following or gaining publishing rights? For example, those Indigenous authors will have faced racism and issues in terms of publishing their works that Joseph Boyden may not have faced because of his ability to pass and his ongoing reputation with the public and being in the public eye. Wab Kinew responded to the APTN investigation through both an article in the Globe and Mail and multiple interviews with different organizations, including APTN and CBC for sure. Kinew suggests that it is problematic if Boyden has taken opportunities away from Indigenous writers and he has also taken up a role as a public figure and speaks about Indigenous issues when he probably doesn't have the same grasp on Indigenous issues as someone who has actually lived in a community and lives that experience through the way that they look and the way that they speak, their language, their culture. But his article states, already some non-Indigenous readers are asking if they should read his work. That's one of the questions that I had about this. His novel remains powerful, but they will always be the work of a talented outsider. Even if he is Anishinaabe, he is not a member of the nations that he wrote about. Recognizing the distinctions will inform readers. So yes, read Joseph Boyden, but also read authors who have lived a more Indigenous experience, which I think is really good advice and is a good way to look at this situation. Even so, Kinew also takes the time to consider the complexity of Indigenous identity and ends his Globe and Mail article with this quote: There is room for There's room in our circle for everyone, even those who do not behave as we would like. We include them not just to make our circle bigger. We love one another as relatives because it frees our hearts from hurt and allows us to embrace the goodness in each of us. When we do that, we are stronger, all my relations. So while we can keep teaching Boyden, we must teach him for what he is and what he isn't. And we must make room for many other marginalized voices within our own circles. So that was kind of my more formal bit, but I love this book. I think that it does Cheney's story justice, but I think that the issue of Joseph Boyden's heritage does make it so much more complicated. I have read this story and The Secret Path at the same time, and that was after the APTN article came out, whereas I read his first novel, 3-Day Road, before any of this was an issue, so I've had kind of a different perspective on both of his writings. I think that, especially since I'm of an English language and literature background, it's important to struggle with text, and it's important to struggle with the issues that come along with authors and grapple with the question of, does the author really impact the writing, or can the writing stand alone? I think in this case, the writing can't stand alone. You have to consider it, but that's a complexity and critical questioning that you can engage with your students, and I think they'll get it. There's some great videos available with Wab Kinew talking about this issue, and there's some videos now with Joseph Boyden responding to the article that was written about him. But I think the overall message is that keep reading Joseph Boyden, keep reading Cheney's story, but expand your circle to include other Indigenous voices, and Indigenous voices that provide an authentic story of their own experience and a wider experience. In fact, this fits for not just Indigenous authors, but authors of all kinds of backgrounds, and that's something that we should strive for as teachers anyway. All right, thanks so much.